Good day and welcome to the Strong Ambition Podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Qualley, and I'm here to dive into what makes people ambitious and live a more ambitious life, especially in the realm of nutrition, exercise, or mindset, because that's how I help my clients. That's what I'm passionate about. That's my ambition. And I share this ambition with my guest today, one of my mentors and good friends, AJ Zeglen. He is a very like-minded individual to me. I learned so much from him, and having him as a mentor was an absolute blessing because he was a wonderful teacher and he was a very open person. You're going to hear that in the conversation. So what's really cool about this episode is this is Whiskey and Barbells, where we intentionally set up a good conversation while we're drinking and we record it. And this is the second edition. The first edition, luckily I didn't save, or I couldn't save the recording of it. This one was a shockingly very coherent conversation despite drinking for 4 hours. Yes, that's right, 4 hours. This is part one. Now, unfortunately, for those on YouTube, this is mainly going to be audio. At the end of part two, you'll see a bit of it, but just listen to the audio because honestly, this is a wonderful conversation. You're going to hear how two guys who are very passionate about strength and conditioning and nutrition and bodybuilding and everything in between really get to converse and discuss ideas that are even to this day shockingly new to them. And you'll get to see how we really explore all these different ideas and new upcoming things and some of the common mistakes people make when they get really tied into too many ideas. So if you're into training, if you're into nutrition or bodybuilding, anything of that realm, you're going to love this conversation because I dive into it with him. I wanted to know of all the things that I've learned in the last year, and I want to know what he learned. So you get to hear a lot. Now, this is part one. Halfway through, I had to take a pee break. So it was a good time to split up the whole conversation as it did indeed last 4 hours. And then part two will be next week. And again, the conversation is honestly great. You're going to enjoy it. So without further ado, let's dive into this. We hop right into the conversation after we had to fix some tech things because the tech was kind of hard to both record the Zoom and get on Instagram Live. But I think you'll enjoy it. So without further ado, here is AJ and Rylan with Whiskey and Barbells.
Oh, yeah. So obviously, I've got some strength related goals going on. And so, I find whenever it comes to strength training, one of the biggest things that can kind of aid in your progress or throw you off track is injuries, right? So I find I've been fortunate enough here to string together like a pretty long stretch without any little nagging injuries at all, knock on wood, hopefully nothing comes up. I think part of that's been like slightly changing the way that I train a little bit. So because of that, I've been able to string. So I think I'm probably at the strongest I think I've ever been, which feels great right now because I just turned 40 this year, obviously. So being like 40 and, lifting the heaviest weights and moving the most weight that you've ever moved, it makes you feel pretty good.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And I tell your story to a lot of people because in a couple of different ways, in terms of longevity and in terms of like changing body type, right? Because, you started as a little bit more of an ectomorph, still athletic, but ectomorph. And now it's like, I've heard, some friends say like, oh yeah, peaking. It's like, fuck your peak. Like, what are you talking about? Like especially when we're talking about strength and size, you're far away from your peak. You mentally peaked and that's your fault, right?
Agreed. Yeah, we are. It's so hard. It's so much harder to do things than we think it is, like a lot of people will associate stuff with like overtraining. It's really hard to overtrain. And a lot of people will associate stuff with like, oh, I'm peaked. Like it's my genetics. I've reached my genetic ceiling. I'm at my genetic potential. It is so hard to hit your genetic potential. Like you have to do everything right for consistently over an incredibly long period of time. You know what I mean? And we don't, because we all have other stuff going on in our lives. So we don't always eat right and we don't always sleep well and we don't always get the most out of our training and we have other things that come up and we have other responsibilities and stuff like that obviously take priority in certain circumstances. So I'm I'm not sure if any of us ever really, reach that genetic ceiling or that kind of peak, right? There's so much room for progress in all of us. Our ceilings are all so high that, you could have men and women that are what they feel to be older in age. You get like 40 plus and people think you're going to start slowing down and shutting it down. And if anything, sometimes at that point in your life, you now have the experience maybe to almost be a little more focused, right? And you kind of understand a little more, what commitment looks like at that age. You have a little more life experience behind you. Your perception of things are maybe a little different. And it's amazing what you could accomplish. I'm sure you have people that you work with, and I've had a number of people that I work with, both men and women, that are in their 40s, even 50s. I got a guy that I work with right now. You remember Martin Karpinski, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Karpinski. I used to work with him, and he was just getting a new program in. And he was saying right now, so he's moving into his 50s. I hope he doesn't mind me sharing that. And he said he's the strongest he's ever been, so.
I love that.
Tons of room to keep improving.
Well, and I think it's so big on, like you had said, people don't know that you're not hitting your genetic ceiling physically. Mentally, that was your choice. And maybe lifestyle, environment, all these other things. I've heard some friends talk about, their old lifting days when they used to play football and stuff. So what you have when you're younger is a resiliency to, less likely to get injured. You're still getting injured, but you're much more resilient. So your resiliency is high, but your actual effectiveness is terrible because you're probably doing too much and you're overtraining, but you're resilient to that. And so like you had said, when you're older, as you get older, you have to get efficient. You have to make sure that you're not spending too much time in the gym, not just because of like life, which is a huge problem, but on top of that, because you're no longer resilient in your joints and you have these basically all those asymmetries and those imbalances that you added up for years and years and years are now causing you this shoulder pain or hip pain. And so it's like, well, now I'm going to be very targeted with my approach. Now I'm not going to do an hour and a half and not be able to stand up from my chair the next day because that's going to cause an issue in my hip. And same thing with your chest and everything else. And so I think, like you had said it really well, just like people don't know, you're not actually hitting your limit. You chose your limit because of your circumstances. And the other big thing is, I think your goal is very, important. So if we're talking about strength goals, the number one thing that I've really appreciated so much is like, as boring as the answer sounds, but it's consistency is so key. And like looking at it as a skill with proper loading development. And that has been probably one of my biggest lessons this last year. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, was like some things that I've learned, some things that you learned over the last year. New Year's around the corner, so why not talk about that? And for me, like just sticking to that 5-3-1 premise and just never letting myself go above and beyond what I needed to for that day. Like there were so many times where I would have a situation and you almost get caught up in the numbers, right? So it's like, oh, well, I should do 295 this week because that's what the protocol says, but I want to do 300. And I finally became the person that said 295 is the fucking protocol. Do the fucking protocol. And then you rock 300 next week or even 4 weeks from now, and it's going to feel really easy. And that 5 pounds is what makes the difference between doing it right and getting hurt so much. And, I think part of the injuries that you receive is that very valuable lesson of when you go slightly too heavy and you're slightly offline, then you're out of it for months, right? So I think that's been a really important thing. But the consistency, like I talked to some friends and they're so big on this or that. I'm like, dude, the 5-3-1 for a fucking year. Do it for a year. I would be shocked to meet an average person or even a strong average person, even your average gym goer that likes to train 3 to 4 days a week. Yeah. If they did the 5-3-1 protocol appropriately, trying to get better at each lift, I don't see many people not getting like substantially stronger on that.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. It's just consistency over time, right? That's the biggest factor in training.
And it's boring, but it's like, it's what it is. It's like, and it was funny too, because I remember hearing backward as a focus, and I still appreciated it because it was a protocol, but I didn't see how simple and eloquent it was.
Right.
That when you do the lower body, you put 10 pounds on, and you do the upper body, you put 5 pounds on each lift, right? So you're thinking, oh man, just 5 pounds, just 10 pounds. And then I did the math on it. And I said, wait a minute, 10 months at 5 pounds is 50 pounds. And then 10 months, it's 100 pounds. I'm like, how is this not fucking beautiful?
Yeah.
So it's definitely an important learning curve that so few people get a chance to really appreciate what it's doing for them. Every one of my, not every, but most of my clients, just like, these are your numbers, like, don't overthink it. And just the 5-3-1 premise, I think, I really adopted that for many years now to almost every strength protocol that I utilize, most anyways, is like, I always tell people, it's like, practice the movement and prep it at the start, right? Or usually I say prep, practice, push, like if you got 3 sets. So it's like, really, like, just get everything warm. Then you go a little heavier, or you just really practice it really well. You're still going near failure, but not quite. Then you push it. And so this has been a huge thing for me in the last year. And this is where I actually wanted to ask you some things about it, was the idea of, the difference between 3 or 4 sets, like how big of a substantial, or even 2 to 3. I really see like strength as being like the push indicator in the skill. So what I had talked to you about, how I was doing more of that, fast in and out half-hour workouts, is like, how important is more sets? Like, how important is it outside of, if you want to develop your skill better, or you're trying to do substantial volume? And even that, that is really when you're in a calorie surplus. So most people don't really need to do 4 sets of things. And this is just something that I've adopted for my clients. It gets them in and out in an hour, gets me in and out in an hour. So I was curious on that, like, for your whole perception of strength training, what is the value of the 4th set? That's really what I look at.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it depends on, again, like, what you're training for. So if you are talking about strength, is there value in that 4th set? I guess it depends if that 4th set is at the beginning, let's say, like, because you're adding in an extra warm-up set to kind of,
right.
I like the term grease in the groove. So you're like, maybe you need an extra set just to practice just moving the bar in that good movement pattern, or maybe you need.
I'm still here. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe you need an extra set just to warm up, just because you feel like you don't want too big of a jump from what you would call your practice set to your push set, right? You don't want to be going from like 100 pounds and all of a sudden jumping up to 200 pounds on the next set. So you want to add in another set in there at 150, right? So I guess it somewhere splitting the difference in the middle. So I guess it depends where you're talking about having that 4th set. But yeah, your point, I think what you're getting at there is that if you prepare properly and you use like the right percentage of loading at the right intensity, then like those 3 sets are more than ample for building substantial strength. And it's probably the most effective way to go about it.
Right. And so I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't really dress up where this is situated in a workout. When it has to do with your main lift, if you're talking about powerlifting or main lifting, you're talking about the average strength training kind of protocol, you're looking at about 4, maybe even 5 sets, depending on, like, if you're getting into the high bills, right? When I'm prepping for the deadlift, week 1, it might be easier because I'm at like 85%, but when you're getting your high end, it's like, well, I can't jump from 300 to 500, right? So I need an extra set in there. And the more sets, actually, the better, because as I had said, it's prep. And then there's this prep practice zone, and then it's push. But and in that push, that's really where I take the last load, right? But you need to be ready for it. Now, when I look at like the rest of the workout, this is where I think it gets interesting, because, I just see so many more styles now, and I appreciate 2 or 3 sets, and sometimes 1, and just, especially when you have kind of more your average gym goer doesn't know how efficient workouts can be. And, I've done this with many people, and including myself. This is where I look at it is, we want every average person to be healthy, right? We want everyone to be healthy and to be stronger in some way. Maybe you change the lift or whatever it is. It doesn't always have to be the big three. It could be get better on push-ups. It's push, pull, squat, hinge in some way. Now, this is where we can kind of cut the sets and reps, because this is where I've been big on what I call the minimum, or I think a lot of people call it the minimum effective dose, right? It's the 80-20 principle. When you want most of your benefits, your muscles need to know that the external load could happen to its legs or your arms. It just needs to know that this happens in the environment. So what I have with many of my clients that have these short, time windows that they can work out, I'm like 2 sets, like prep it, push it, get out. Because, and that's just like a mind blowing thing for people, where they think about like all these things that they think they need to do. It needs to be at least an hour. And it's just like, if you're doing more than an hour, other than maybe a little bit of extra mobility because you're an athlete, maybe a little bit of an extra cool down because you're just stiff, like any intense work should be done, in my opinion, for most people and even athletes within an hour.
Right. Yeah. No, I would agree. There's always going to be certain situations, right? Like just depending what you're training for, like there's always going to be outliers outside, right? As Keith, when he was getting ready to climb those mountains, obviously some of the workouts we would do would go well over, it would go into the hours, right? But now you have a very specific goal that you're training for, and that's not how he would train 365 days a year. That's how we started training 100 days out from climbing the mountain, right?
Right.
And it would like built up or whatever. But so, it's always so tough in training to apply, because like you always want to give people general principles to follow, because, that's how stuff works. We want kind of simple kind of rules that we could apply to multiple different things that work. And so I was saying, in general, yes, I would feel that like an hour should be plenty sufficient for athletes, average gym goers, whatever, for most people's goals are to go into the gym, get their work done. It's just a little less sets, but each set contains a little more purpose to it. And you make the most of it, right? But that's a skill in itself, right? You'll know this. Your perception yourself, even with your own lifts and stuff, has probably changed on your RPE, your rate of perceived exertion, maybe your kind of knowledge of knowing what a bad rep and a good rep feels like, knowing how close you are to failure, or taking something to failure, or knowing to go to maybe technical failure, but leaving one in the tank. So you're not, you know what I mean? Like all those different things are, skills and attributes that you've built on and probably worked on in your career that have changed over, let's say you've been lifting for 15 years. What you looked like on day one and what you look like today has probably changed a lot, right? From your experience that you've gained.
Well, what you had said that was really important there to me was the idea of it being a skill, because like I look at, for sure, even with myself, the efficiency of being in the gym, right? So if you looked at me like 5, 6, actually, I'd say focus is a prime zone where I was the most inefficient in the gym, because I was spending an hour and a half to 2 hours. Now, I mean, I was enjoying it. It was social. There was that aspect of it, but I'd spend 45 fucking minutes rolling out my shoulders. And it's like, but what was I actually doing? I was on my phone enjoying a massage every fucking time. The worst part about that was I was only massaging the traps and like the back of the shoulders and stuff, and leaving my chest out of it. Like the chest had nothing to fucking do with my shoulder issue. Like it's the stupidest thing. And so, and constant shoulder issues, go figure, right? I was just loosening what felt good for a massage through the overtraining. I didn't follow any 5-3-1 principles, just making shit up. But now I'm stronger than ever. And most of this strength, I would say I don't want to say all of it, but like for sure in the last couple of years, I just started really adopting the 5-3-1 principle. And
Right.
this last year, combining mobility into every single fucking rest that I have in the gym, like it became a huge skill, because I even recognized what I was trying to guide my clients on. I'm like, hey, well, just kind of do some mobilities that you know that work good. They're like, I don't know what you mean. And I'm like, okay, do these. And you have to be very specific. But for me, it's like I do a squat. Okay, that hip's tight. Let's go loosen up. Let's do some bird dog. Let's do some other stuff. Okay, do another lift. I can like integrate all my, mobility work within things at any instant. And it pains me to see in some way, but it's my own prerogative of wanting to be efficient, but just knowing that, like, I know that you're doing powerlifting, you got to rest, but don't sit on your phone. Like, and then tell people that you don't have time to work out consistently. Like that kind of frustrates me, because it's like, you're there to work, and hey, I'm not saying it's all like get out of breath hard. It's just, then you're complaining about other issues. I know this because I was there. So that was a skill development I had to have, and to recognize you had to have experience with all the different mobilities that work, that are the most efficient and still really effective, not fatiguing too much, that actually open things up and make the movement better. So there was a huge learning curve there, undoubtedly. I think that's very accurate. One question I have for you, and this has been boggling me because I still don't know the answer, and I'd love to see research or really know this is. Oh, you can't hear me? What's that?
No, I can hear you fine. I was just going to say there's a good chance I don't know either, but I'll take my best shot at it.
Well, because you have experience in this. Okay. So hypertrophy training during a bodybuilding cut. And this is what was boggling my mind. I'm like, what the fuck is the fourth set for? If more sets, more time under tension is for hypertrophy, right? So if we're in a deficit and the difference in your calories isn't going to be substantial, 4 sets to 3 sets, and the overall systemic like exhaustion of the nervous system is probably a fair bit more. And so I started to really think about it, like, what are we doing with this fourth set? Why aren't these really efficient workouts and controlling calories? Now, this is where I think we just don't know the answer unless you were to research it. My theory is that you are still creating such a hypertrophy type environment, like you're demanding so much from the system that it would have fewer detriment to your lean body mass, because your body's like, we really fucking need this because this is a lot of volume. So that was my one thought, that it is still necessary. But when I deal with general public, I actually say, no, you actually can just do 2 sets. Like we're not pushing our body to, for accessory work more specifically, like accessory, you know what I mean?
No, yeah, I know what you mean. So this is where, one, I think it's a great question. But I think you're on the right track. So I'm no longer convinced, let's say we're looking at that very specific example. So we're looking at that example. You have someone getting ready for a bodybuilding show. Obviously their goal is to drop as much body fat, maintain as much muscle tissue as possible. You're in a deficit, obviously, to do that. Is that fourth set important? I think I would agree. I'm starting to turn on this where I don't think it is. So I don't think you're far off. Like when you kind of come into that conclusion, I think you're on the right track there. There's a few things for it, and I've been obviously learning some of this. Obviously, as I go, I'm still learning every single day, all the time. I used to think that the biggest thing that controlled volume was, that controlled hypertrophy was overall volume and time under tension. And what I've come to understand and what I've been learning over the years here is that it's not. It's actually mechanical tension that is the greatest driver of hypertrophy. And where a certain movement would fall on the force velocity curve. And whether you're working muscles in a shortened or lengthened position, and there's these other factors that come into play other than just high volume. So, I think because you should be critical of yourself and what you've done in the past. Like I look at some of the stuff that I've done in the past before with myself, with clients and stuff. And I think like, hey, I don't think I would do that anymore. And I look at some of that volume and just be like, I now equate that to being like junk volume, a bunch of extra volume, but what's your return on it? You know what I mean? I don't think the return is there, like I really don't. And so I would tend to agree with you. Like I kind of lean more on the side now. And obviously, like I said, I'm learning more as I go, and everybody is, the funny thing is that you'll see guys now on Instagram and social media now that just pick up with whatever the latest information is, and they act like as if they were on that side of the argument or like the whole time, and then they'll like sit there and they'll be like, they'll judge everyone else and they'll be like, well, volume doesn't matter. You guys are idiots. I'm like, okay, like, let's be honest here. For the last like 100 years, I felt like almost everyone felt that volume mattered for hypertrophy, right? Like everyone kind of thought it was the main driver. There's still a whole camp of people that feel it's the main driver, but what the science is now supporting more of is that it's actually more due to mechanical tension. I can try to explain it and we could talk about it or whatever. I feel if you really want a great explanation for it, I would go follow Paul. There's a gentleman named Paul Carter, and his Instagram handle is Lift Run Bang 1, like the number 1. And I got to say, like, keep in mind, you have to go in there with the idea that all he's talking about in his content is purely hypertrophy, nothing else. So when he shreds certain exercises or makes fun of like a landmine press and says it's like a terrible shoulder exercise, or when he does anything like that, you got to always keep in the back of your mind that it's because he has dedicated his whole work now just to hypertrophy work. He's an ex-power lifter that kind of fell out with powerlifting, wasn't, didn't really love it anymore and got kind of dedicated himself to hypertrophy. But he'll do this whole conversation more justification than I ever will, more justice than I ever will on explaining just the importance now of mechanical tension over total volume or total time under tension, right? But long story short, basically what that points to is exactly the conclusion that you're coming to yourself, that is that 4th set, is that 5th set really, really worth it? And probably not, especially in that situation like you said. Man, you've already put yourself in a caloric deficit. You're already under a ton of stress. It's already a very demanding situation. Why are you going to go out there and do another 1 or 2 sets that you're going to get zero benefit from? It just doesn't make any sense.
And I love that because, like, you know what, this last year, and you put me on Paul Carter after our last conversation, and I've been loving his stuff. And, super entertaining how big of aggressive he is. And he's even actually like, he's chopped me down. I think I said something and I was like, I agreed with everything you said, but he's just so instinctive. But anyways, I do think it's super fascinating. So I can't remember what the guy's name is. I used to follow him, but he was on Mark Bell's podcast, and he was talking about how he's seeing, and he does hypertrophy research. He was a personal trainer for decades, and same thing where it was like, you thought the overall volume was, in time under tension was what I was told and all that stuff. And even when this happens, this is an interesting thing. I remember seeing Kristen Thibodeau like kind of laugh about this, where he's like, the skinny guy, it's a cartoon. There's this huge jack guy saying time under tension works. He's like, no, research says it's not time under tension. And then, right. And so it's just like, it's kind of worked for people, right? But there's just more to the story, I think, is what we're understanding. And what this researcher had said is that it's reps near failure per muscle group per week. And so, right. When people say bro splits don't work, it's like, well, fuck, if they get enough sets per near failure, it'll work. Total bodies can work, like you can do a million ways up the same hill, right? Like it's all going to work in some way. And yes. So it just is interesting. And when people get like you say, they get campish, they say, oh, it's all this, it's all that. And then at the end of the day, we still don't fucking know. Like, it's still just where we're leaning. And there's got to be a reason why some things work.
Yeah. And I mean, I think so. I think why the volume group had, so, I mean, there's a gray area. I'm not saying that anyone that equated hypertrophy work to volume was incorrect. It was just that, so, you know, again, let's say you take your example of your 3 and 4 sets, right? The guy doing the 4 sets is probably still going to see progress in hypertrophy, right? He's still going to see it, even if he doesn't understand that 99% of those results might have come from the first 3 sets. He's still doing 4 sets total and still see, you know what I mean? So if the sets were done, you know, even if the guy does 5 sets or whatever, if there was, you know, at least 3 sets within there, whether it's, you know, whether it 3, 4, 5 total, that hit at the right intensity, at the right loading, at the right, to create the right amount of mechanical tension, to be the catalyst for hypertrophy, then it's going to work, right? So, like I said, we've changed, like, and I've kind of changed. We've talked about this before, but I don't think we were necessarily really far off, right? Because I know we had this discussion many times, even when you first started working at the gym. And my thought on hypertrophy was always that the volume has to be higher, but it also has to be at a high enough weight to elicit the type of effect that we're trying to get out of it, right?
Okay, I love that you brought that up. I want to use your actual quote because it's fucking beautiful and it does nail it. Do you remember what you said at all?
I don't remember, no.
You said it very specifically, and I loved it because it made sense. It's lifting heavy weight as much as possible. And it wasn't as like, I knew what you were saying. You're saying like both, like you can't just lift heavy weight because you can't lift it yet. But it's both the fact that if you're only doing 10s and you do it like, and that's all you're doing, well, you got to be able to do 20s and 25s and 100s. Like it's not 100% correlated, but it's definitely associated with size and strength, but not 100% correlated because there's a certain crossover that happens with movement patterns in powerlifting, right? For example, where it's a skill, less about the muscle, right? So it's not just all about the weight, but it's also certainly like there's a volume in that component. My belief is like always been, you know, what motor unit and muscle fiber type are you recruiting most of? And I still kind of believe this, like all of these discussions that we're having are so important because it is still unknown. Like we have so many tools that we can use to measure things. We have so many tools to know, is this activating? Is this growing it? Like how many times you see Paul Carter saying, this isn't a fucking glute exercise. Stop doing the mini bands. And It's like, he hates the word activation and I'm starting to not like it as much either because it's like, you're not turning on a switch. Like it doesn't work like that. Right. But at the same time, the whole idea to me with hypertrophy is if you target hypertrophy muscle fiber type, the type of muscle fiber, as we formerly always thought it was type 1 slow twitch and type 2 A and B, right? But there's a whole subgroup. There's a bunch of them. And I remember hearing Mike Israetel, Dr. Mike Israetel, great guy to listen to for hypertrophy. And this is a PhD who is just an absolute monster, right? So he knows his shit. And he describes it quite well, where he's even breaking down all the different probable muscle fiber types that you would genetically have. And I always believe that it's like, clearly if powerlifters, they're big, but they're not always that big. You know, the reason why bodybuilders are big, because they actually ensure that the ones that are around that, you know, literally the reason why that rep range of 8 to 10 to 12 to 15 and 20, if that weight is heavy enough and you do it often enough, it's going to elicit that response for growth. And so it kind of makes sense that if you build up certain muscle fiber types, and we're seeing like and then you can think about all the associations. well, why wouldn't this happen with the 1, 3, 4 reps, right? Well, that's a nervous system shock, right? You can't fucking do that at high volume. You're going to fall apart. So the beautiful thing about the 8 to 10 or 10 to 12 or 12, especially the 12 to 15, the best thing about 12 to 15 is you're sore and you're good. Like, it's the recovery, right? So the recovery rate is so vital if you're trying to have maximum volume. So it's still, in some way, it's a volume with a stress, right? And so I heard a guy describe this super well, and he said bodybuilding is essentially almost always overtraining. Like, it's kind of what it is, right? Because you're pushing that volume and intensity the best you can so that you don't fall apart. And then that's going to elicit the biggest response. But yeah, I think it's really interesting that in this last year, I'd say more recently, especially watching Paul Carter like get into like Instagram battles with people, I'm just like, man, we're still debating this stuff a lot. And I thought it was pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting to know how much we still don't know what we know in training, right?
And even when we know, like I said, always so important to remember the context of the information that we're consuming, right? Because as myself working with athletes a high percentage of time, sometimes I'll almost forget and I'll watch or read something from Paul Carter and I'm instantly like, no, what? And then I'm like, oh yeah, okay. He is specifically talking about hypertrophy. He's not talking about strength. He's not talking about athletic performance. He's not talking about this, you know what I mean? So when he's trashing certain things, you always got to remember too, the context of that information that you're consuming, right? Because, and the funny thing is he'll remind you of that numerous times. Like, people will leave him strength questions all the time. And he's like, sorry, man, I'm not here for strength stuff, hypertrophy content only. Sorry, man. You know what I mean? And even though he like regularly, almost on a daily basis, reminds people what he's doing, everyone always still forgets. And then they forget the context of the information he's delivering. And then you take that information out of context. And then that's usually what starts half the arguments, right? Because people are like, what do you mean you think this, you know what I mean? And he's like, hey man, I'm not saying that rack pulls suck. He's like, I'm saying that, you know, if you're a power lifter and you're working on a certain range of motion, or you're an Olympic lifter and then pulling from a rack might be super beneficial for you. He's like, I'm only talking specifically about hypertrophy. For a hypertrophy movement, there's better things that you could do for your glutes or your lats or your whatever, right? You know what I mean? Like, so that's always really important too. And that gets lost a lot when you're taking in a bunch of the training advice online, right? And reading people's stuff and watching videos. You know, there's a specificity to training situations. And so when you're, you know, when I'm developing something for an athlete, you know, there's certain things or whatever that I feel that if they were taking out of context, people might think like, well, what is this guy talking about? Like, why doesn't he like doing this? And I'm like, no, that's not what I said. I'm like, for this athlete, this individual person in this specific sport, in this particular phase of their training program or whatever, this is what we're doing because of this. I'm not saying that, I don't know, that back squats suck or whatever. You know what I mean? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for this is what we do, right? So anyway, I think sometimes that gets lost a lot, right? Everyone always has to remember the context of the information and like how it's being delivered and what it's actually talking about. Everyone always wants to bring stuff back to themselves and everything that they know, right? Everyone always wants to be like, no, I know better. I do this, or I read this, you know what I mean? It's like, no, this isn't about you. This guy has voluntarily shared some of his expertise information with you. Don't mess it up by getting the context of it wrong and making it about yourself. This guy's sharing for you on a very particular thing. He's, in Paul Carter's case, it's, hypertrophy. Eric Cressy's case, who I know is a guy that we both really like and respect to, he's looking at athletes and athletic populations, a lot of athletic populations that would throw overhead, like in baseball and stuff. He talks a lot about that stuff. So the context is always important, right? Because there's so many different little kind of ways that you can go with training, right? And everyone always gets really offended if you're outside of their thought process. But what they fail to realize half the time or recognize is that, the context of which you're speaking might not match what they're wanting to tell you about themselves, right?
Absolutely. I still remember one of the best profs I had in Kines was this lady who, no matter what, would always say it depends. And it was in the principles of fitness training. And she wrote her test well, where she's like, hey, this true and false section, you write, even if I think it's false, but you can prove it, or I think it's true and you can prove it otherwise, and you can make the argument, I'll give you the points. Because she made it very evident right off, like throughout the whole course, was this can always be debated and we don't know everything. And it's so important that context matters. And when you even just think about I love that whole personality you described, where people get really like they're worried about what they know, really, because they're like, oh no, but I did this, or no, this guy said that, and now it becomes a personal thing. And I almost got into a little bit of I did get into a little bit of an argument in some comments on something about supinated barbell row. Okay, so this guy had
in an argument on the internet.
Yeah. It's only happened to me a couple times.
You fell for it. You took the bait, man.
Well, yeah, it was bait, because it was his absolute arrogance of the scenario. It was something about, like, I studied anatomy for a year or something like that, and I'm like, I feel like I've been in the gym for a couple of years, and I'm just saying, I can literally. So he was saying how there's no difference in a barbell bent over row between the bias of the lats or the traps. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, every single time I lift that bar, I don't even need to look at a research article to know that I feel a difference. I'm not saying that there isn't traps and lats in both of them, but there's going to be a bias. And it was just a really weird thing where he was trying to basically say he had studied it for a year, and so he knows. And so this is where just like, and I honestly, this is where I'm saying, like, I had to be the person to be like, okay, that's how you feel. I'm done. Like, I just like, this is, I'm not even, I don't care enough about how you feel about it. And I went back like once, twice maybe, but I don't know. It's just like it's a dangerous world on social media now, when you start arguing people on their personal, and it shouldn't even be a personal belief. You know what I mean?
You shouldn't really marry, like I learned a long time ago, not to necessarily marry myself permanently to any sort of belief in training. There's lots of stuff that when I started working with people in gyms, like in the early 2000s, like literally 20 years ago, that were thought to be like absolute truths, you know what I mean? In training and stuff. And, 20 years later, like it's not even talked about. Like it's not Skavinsky, absolutely Canadian whiskey.
That's all we drink here.
But you know what I mean? So I try not to really, you have to have certain underlying principles or foundations that you can because there's so much information out of there. I always say that you need something to kind of be able to always draw yourself, keep you kind of centered in some of your beliefs in training. But outside of some kind of basic principles like that, I mean, you're always learning. There's nothing that I would ever just, feel that I have to like fight to the death over, you know what I mean? Like a particular exercise, like you're saying on, someone on the internet might be like, just so, dead set against not doing it. You'll see it with guys in like, let's say like the back squat or something like that, right? Where they just feel the back squat, there is no compromise. There is no substitution. And you're like, yeah, there's lots of substitutions, man. Like if you like the back squat, we'll back squat. If for some reason you can't back squat or you just don't enjoy it, like unless you're sport a lot, like obviously if you're going to be a power lifter, I'm going to make you back squat because that is literally your sport. So you better be damn good at it. But if you're a hockey player, you don't have to back squat. I don't care if you back squat or not. If you don't want to back squat, we won't back squat. We'll trap bar deadlift. We'll split squat. We'll RFE split squat. We'll do lunges. We'll do single leg squats. We'll do like a million different exercises to increase leg strength. Like it's, you know what I mean? Like I'm never really married to one absolute kind of exercise or anything like that where I would feel the need to like argue with people. You know what I mean? Like, because yeah, like you said, you just, you'd get a few exchanges in back and forth and you'd be like, you know what? This is like, what is this worth? You know what I mean? Like this person is obviously like married themselves to the idea that this exercise is what it is. And I just can't be bothered to change their mind. I don't really care that much.
No, and it's really. So I actually even had a comment the one day in chirping the 45-minute warm up, and I just asked him, I was like, but why are you doing that? Like, that's all the question was. He didn't go back and forth or anything. I'm just like, I think, and it was on my post, so I felt like I had a right. But when I had that conversation with the other guy, it was just like he was so dead straight on it, and I think it was because his lack of description, it was so vague that it pissed me off. But then as soon as he kept coming back, and it's like, anytime you're in an argument and the person does not make a new argument, they don't make anything new, just get the fuck out, because it's done. Like you are officially wasting your life's time because no one wins. And I literally told him, we're gonna have to agree to disagree, because I know what I've felt, I know what's worked for me. And then he ranted about something else. I'm like, I had to walk away. And it's interesting when, I try not to be married to things, and I would say like, way more than ever in the last 3 years, I'd say I have adopted more, beliefs and things I don't know than ever. I've just been, I've been a way better sponge. I was a sponge when I was younger, but it was too set on what I thought I could make out of things and understand out of things, rather than trying and trusting things that were there. And now I'm trying and trusting a lot of the traditional approaches, but also appreciating this in between, where you got to listen to this new research and be open to it. Like hypertrophy is a prime example. And at the same time, it's hard because you also got to be critical, right? Because then you have new things that come up, and so cold contrast therapy is a big one, saunas and red light therapy and then all this stuff. And what I found is, I'm like, I just love to say it could be, but I'm not going to worry about it right now. Like I just say, like, when new research comes out, even in terms of like whether it's hypertrophy or strength, you say you stick to your guiding principles. If down the road I have a reason to move left or right, I'm not here, like you say, not married to the thought, not saying I have to do this, we have to be on this volume or this, like I'm not saying we have to do it. I'm saying we're going to stick with this for now. And also there's just the good old bro science. What's fucking worked for me and my clients is super valuable because it's real life. And then if I see enough evidence start to support this stuff, okay, then I'll start implementing it. But okay, I think my headphones are about to give up on me. Hang on a sec here.
Yeah, no problem.
I gotta grab my other set here.
But the other thing to always remember too is that we were kind of all in those places at a certain time, right? Like you said, so you got a guy giving you a bit of grief when you're knocking like the 45 minutes of rolling out, right? But you always kind of keep in the back.
Here.
Just earlier in our conversation, you said like you were having these 2-hour workouts and you spent 45 minutes rolling out, right? And rolling out your shoulder, right? So it's always kind of important too. I always try to remember that, sometimes these guys with these very strong opinions or whatever, using your example of, let's say like the 45-minute rollout, right? Is we were probably all there at some point, like some point along the way, we probably at one time believed that also was maybe the way to do it, right? And obviously now, like you said, you've learned how to be far more efficient with your time, far more useful. You learned that what you were doing was more just laying around on your phone and not actually helping you out, because you weren't actually even like getting into some of the other supporting muscle groups that might have been affecting your shoulder because you weren't really paying attention to how that worked. And, now you've found mobility exercises that work with you. You use them as fillers in between your sets. You're far more efficient, right? But it took you time to get there. So like at the time when you were rolling up for 45 minutes on the floor, you probably would have argued with someone at that point that you were doing the right thing, maybe, So we all kind of go through our things like of how we learn. And I mean, man, with the information out there and the access to the information and the facilities out there that people can train at, like I see these kids coming through and learning stuff, and it accelerated far faster than I ever learned anything. Like when I was old enough to be like a university athlete, like facilities like the one that I work at and facilities like other ones we have around the city, those places didn't even exist. And the internet did not exist. Like there was no information out there, no whatever, you know what I mean? So I felt like I was learning at like a glacial rate, like just so slow compared to how people can learn nowadays, right? So, I don't know what I'm saying. I guess I'm just basically saying some of the stuff that I look back and shake my head at people being like, oh man, this guy's stuck on this. And then I think to myself, I'm like, you know what? I was probably there 10 years ago. And I was probably at that time, I thought I knew everything and I thought I was so smart and I thought what I was doing was the thing. And until it wasn't, you know what I mean? And then I moved on to the next thing. So now I look back, and so sometimes I could have a little bit of, sympathy is not the right word, but a little bit of understanding how some of these guys get stuck on some of these ideas or principles along the way, because myself and yourself, we were probably all there at one point, right?
Well stated. No, it's I want to say empathy in some way, because it's a former version of yourself, right? Right. I can feel what you felt, and you're 100% right. I thought I was doing something I was supposed to do. And that's the big thing that a lot of people, I think that's a really like a humble approach to like strength training. And I think that's why you and I are so similar in our strength training approach, or just coaching approach. To be a coach, to be a personable coach, is I think you and I always look at the understanding of the individual. And there's so many people that have their standard, and that's not always the individual. Like we tend to meet people where they are, and with a lot less judgment than I think a lot of trainers do.
Right.
But like, it's that complete empathy and appreciation. It's like, hey, we are all stupid at some point. And I'm yet to hear too many strength training coaches that didn't say, yeah, I was stupid when I was a young kid in the gym. I was stupid. I hurt myself. I overtrained. Like, I am yet to hear of too many, and maybe one or two. I've heard of like maybe one or two like top like level. I'm not sure if strength trainer or power lifter, but either way, like I think bodybuilder he might have been. I've only and honestly, of all these podcasts and everything I've listened to, almost everyone's gotten hurt from something stupid. And I say almost, there's some people who dodge it, but at the same time, it's like we all go through stupid realms, and actually we're still doing it, right? We're still going through stupidity, right? And so it's definitely the trial and error of your fitness journey. That's a huge part of it, is appreciating the stupidity. And I think that's like probably one of the biggest steps I wish I would have taken off the bat was, and I know, again, the empathy and appreciation of the arrogant mind, and thinking, I know how to lift things up and down. You know what I mean? Like, I got my first bench press as a kid, and my mom's like, you should go see this guy. He knows how to lift weights and he can help you with it. And I'm just like, I know how I'm going to get my bench up. That's all that fucking matters. My bench is going to get up. And it did. And that proceeded to create very rounded shoulders and shoulder problems issues. And, I could have trained really well and been a much better athlete younger. But, this arrogant mindset that we go in at a young age of, I know I can figure this out. It can't be that complicated. And to be fair, it's like, I don't think it seems like the inherently confusing thing. I always compare this to like a mechanic, right? So the reason why I say a mechanic, because a mechanic has a skill that would 100% make your life easier if you had it. Carpenter, maybe if you have a house. In terms of, you could do this yourself. All of the information's online. YouTube, how to do an oil change. Would you YouTube how to fix your squeaky brakes? Would you YouTube how to, fix your leaky brakes or anything in your engine? It's all doable. Now, the reason why we wouldn't, and a lot of people don't, is because we're dealing with hardwire that isn't our actual body and physiology, that we just don't know that, but we should know our body, right? And this is where, like, I really try to explain to people, it's like, it's completely understandable you don't know your body, because the whole education system didn't prepare you for a goddamn thing. And I really feel like we're figuring it out in the last 50 years about what the body needs and wants. And we're still super young in both fitness and nutrition and what it is to be healthy.
Agreed. Yeah. Sorry, you kind of froze there for.
Oh, I did.
30 seconds, and then it kind of cut back in right to your last point there. So
that was a fucking beautiful rant. Son of a bitch.
I think
the fundamentals of it was just, the reason why people want to treat their body is because they think it's their body. It's not a different, artillery, right? But, owning your own body is something you think you should know how to do. And I still don't, you know what I mean? Like, this whole discussion on hypertrophy alone, and then there's strength training. And then you got to consider, like, what strength training movements do we need? And what is the best way to do them, And then we, nutrition, that's a whole nother fucking realm. I still remember hearing that Pavel guy, who's like the kettlebell, he's known as a kettlebell guy, but he's way bigger. Yeah. Tazzolini, he's like way bigger than that, than just the kettlebells, but he really made him popular. And I remember a discussion with him on Joe Rogan where he had just said, oh, that stuff's too confusing. I just can't even touch it. He said, like, I get my nutritionist to tell me what to eat. I eat once a day and that's it. But which is in and of itself is such a, a weird thing. But for a guy who knows so much about strength training, like everything to a T, and you listen to his discussion around the metabolic driver for hypertrophy, he talks about phosphocreatine system. He talks about power. And so, he has a bit of a different school of thought, but similar to what some new research is there. And just for him to be so humble to say it's so fucking confusing is a really cool thing, because I think this is what people don't want to hear. But I know as a strength coach and someone who's really into nutrition as well, it's like, I love hearing that from people, because those are the people I want to have conversations with. When people start, especially in nutrition, start going with absolutes, any person in fitness given absolutes, like, this is absolute, this, you should absolutely do this or shouldn't do this. Yeah. It's when you absolutely don't listen to them.
I like that when they yeah, I would agree, man. As soon as someone starts dealing in absolutes, I usually start tuning them out a little bit, right? Because I'm just like, hey, I feel this is no longer correct. You know what I mean? Like, it can't be. There's just no way. Like, there's, I know enough to know that there's always different options. I think I've told you this story before, this saying before, I think, because I think I told everyone this thing that's ever worked at Focus was there's more than one right way to do things. But that was taught to me actually in the terms of the phrase of there's a million ways to skin a cat. And that was Ryan Van Asten, who at the time was the head strength and conditioning coach for the female side of Hockey Canada. So I worked under him for that. He went on to win 2 Stanley Cups with the LA Kings, and then he's currently with the Calgary Flames now. But I remember him telling me that, and that at a bar, drinking whiskey at a bar in Hamilton, and he told me that, and that like stuck with me. There's coaches or mentors or people that you work with over the years, and there's, always 1 or 2 or 3 things where you like specifically remember something that they said. And it's, and that's one thing that he said to me that always kind of stuck with me. Right. So from that point on, anytime anyone was dealing in absolutes, I was always like, does this person really know? I feel like as soon as someone starts dealing in absolutes in the fitness industry, I feel like now they're trying to sell me something. You know what I mean? because now they're trying to sell me their product. I remember when I took my kettlebell certification. I think I told you this story before. And the guy it was the most useless certification I ever got in my life. It was through a company called Agatsu. And I mean, I shouldn't say the most useless. You learn something in every situation. I definitely left the weekend learning a few things. So it wasn't completely useless, but I felt like it would have been far more beneficial if the guy wouldn't have spent 80% of the time just trying to convince me that kettlebells were the only training device that mattered. And that if I trained athletes, I should sell everything and focus, get rid of all the equipment, all the dumbbells, all the machines, all the sleds, everything, and just go straight 100% kettlebells and every exercise with kettlebells. And that's the only way I should train athletes. And he was just like so dead set against using any other training implement at any time. It really just kind of turned me off his certification, right? Because all of a sudden I was like, okay, I feel this guy. And sure enough, end of the weekend comes, the guy gives you the pamphlet with the handout to be able to order kettlebells from, you know? I'm just like, of course, this guy just spent 48 hours just cramming kettlebells down my throat. Like they're the only training implement that should ever be used in any situation with any population. And then he gives me the thing to order them, but he's going to give me a deal, you know, because I took the certification. If I order them, I'll get a percentage off the kettlebells. And I was like, so you're right. Anytime they're dealing with absolutes means they should absolutely not listen.
Well, it's so true that they're usually selling something. And I'll say that I think there's two parts to that. They're not just selling it. It's because it is a belief system. It's a part of their identity, right? So you're 100% right that most people that are trying to sell you absolutes are trying to sell you something, especially fitness. It is what they're doing online. That's actually something that they encourage you. That's something that is legitimately, like with any business coach I've ever had for social media, it's like start talking about things that people don't agree with. Now, they don't say you have to do absolutes, but people like to do that because it drives people to their page. But I would say, like, you know, to me, I'll even like, I always like confronting my biases with my clients and anyone is I'll say my two biggest biases that I'll say that are like, I think you should really do. I will not say absolute. I think you should have more protein than most people have. I think you should have near your body weight or ideal body weight. And I do think absolutely everyone can benefit from strength training. But I will also say, to caveat both of those, you don't fucking have to. You can live a completely healthy life. You can live a healthy life by eating what is the recommended dose if everything else is healthy. It's just, to me, going to be fucking harder. And then I also think you can live a healthy life without doing any strength training. Maybe like just being indoors. I think there's completely different ways. My preferential bias comes from my experience and also recognizing how much fucking easier it is when you have enough protein and you just do a bit of strength training. Everything else to me becomes easier, but it's my bias and you don't have to.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so within the context of that, so I agree with both your biases. I feel I'm on the same side of those kind of points or whatever. I also think that people need more protein. The average person needs more protein than they get. But what I will say, to throw in things there that adds flexibility to those topics, is so I do think on average people need more protein. I will add to that, though, that I don't care where they get it from. You know what I mean? So I've worked with people that have been vegan. I've worked with people that have been vegetarian, all sorts of different types of vegetarians, whether they're lacto-ovo or pescatarian or whatever. There's all the different classifications out there. I've worked with people that are just, you know, eat anything. I've worked with people that eat anything but this, you know what I mean? They're like, oh, I like everything but red meat, or I like everything but whatever. And that's fine. Like, so all across the spectrum, anything, number of different sources that they get it from, right? So that adds flexibility to one of your biases. And then the other thing is that strength training looks a lot different than sometimes what people think it is, right? When they hear the term strength training, everyone automatically goes right to like
bodybuilding.
bodybuilding, you're in a cage, you're in a rack with 500 pounds on your back trying to squat it, right? Whereas we know strength training can be a very individualistic thing for the individual person in their situation, in their scenario. So, I mean, if you're dealing with someone in an older population, strength training might be just getting them to, squat down and sit on a bench and stand up because they need to be able to get in and out off a chair, right? That's still strength training. It's a very broad spectrum, right? So I know we talk about not being in absolutes, but the idea of everyone benefiting from strength training, the term like strength training is actually such a broad spectrum that I feel like sometimes even if in their own perception, they feel like they might not be doing strength training, they maybe still really are, you know what I mean? Because maybe they're just working out with their own body weight. And in their mind, that's not strength training because they're not picking up weights. But as you know, working out with your own body weight is a perfectly fine, effective way to strength train, right? You can get a lot of valuable, like quality work done using your own body weight. That's fine. You're still strength training. So it's such a broad term, I feel like it would almost be harder to not strength train than it would be to strength train. You know what I mean? Because, you can almost make the argument like, give any type of training scenario out of there, I guess, short of someone just maybe being into distance running or distance biking or whatever, those would kind of be landing parts on the spectrum without strength training. But I mean, the majority, if you've ever done a workout, whether you've used weights or not, you have done strength training in some capacity, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of a problem with the term because I still remember some of you got to refill.
I got to get ice.
Oh, got to get ice. Get your ice. Get your ice.
I'm a big ice guy.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep talking while he's gone. And what I did was I actually filled one of my coffee thermoses with my ice ahead of time. You got it. So I got one of these coffee thermoses, okay? And these things will keep, like, no matter how fucking cold it is out there, like as cold as it is, me and Angelina were out in a line for like an hour and a half, 2 hours. Tea was still just as fucking hot. Like, so the opposite works. Ice is staying icy. So I got my ice all set. I made sure I had plenty of ice and I don't have to put protein ice cubes in my whiskey tonight.
Yeah, that turned into one of my favorite stories.
So one of the things that I love is, this was what I think I've learned so much in the last year was, I think I've talked to you about this before, is a spectrum of eating. And so I call it a spectrum because you got one end is like carnivore, one end's vegan, and then anything in between, as long as we have the right amount of calories and you try to have mainly 80 to 90% whole foods, like you get your vitamins and minerals in. And then from there, the difference between the carnivore, the vegan, other than you got two, probably more than just two, but there's two different ways to look at it. One is personal experience with the way they're living is very valuable. Like we don't know 100% what healthy is, right? So when someone says a healthy body weight, or someone says, and you've probably seen this a lot, the body positivity movement is very big, and they are very much fighting the term healthy. And I do think they're wrong, but I also think we can't establish it because the only thing that we can say about healthy is, can you live long? And even that is a fucking vague description because people are barely living when they're living long. So it's quality of life. But part of that quality, and this brings me back to the original point, if someone loves the way they eat, then it's fucking good, right? Like, this is why, like, when I had vegan clients, I'm like, I won't be as good for you, but I'll show you how I would do it if I did it. And, the other end of the spectrum with the carnivores, like there's some people who I actually think even have to be relatively close to carnivore, but there's a good portion of them that just like it for their personality. And I fell into that group for a good portion of the year. And there's a lot of comfort in that. And this is the same thing with the keto community, very close to carnivore, because a part of their personality is that they're terrified of carbs. They're terrified what carbs have done to them. And it's not what carbs have done to them. it's like calling it an evil thing. It's like how they react around carbs is a better description. And I'm one of those people. And so I always have to really be aware of my carbs and what I will do when I eat a higher carb diet. And then other people don't have this issue. And so this is why it's a spectrum of eating. It's a spectrum of people finding what makes sense for them. And that's why I appreciate your mindset of I'm not being good. And I thought about this before we met. It's like, you're not about operating in absolutes. And I agree with living in absolutes unless you find that you need to, you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't ever put someone on a carnivore diet. I just generally probably wouldn't, unless there was so much of an elimination that, oh, you have a reaction when you do this, you have a reaction when you do that. Like, you have to go pretty far down the spectrum to get to that point. Now, if someone already came to me with a vegan, that's their choice, that's their opinion. But the main thing to me is, like, if you can appreciate just the idea of what matters to a person because food is very personal, right? And cultural, it's emotional, and this is why I actually only recently started really writing out, okay, this is what a healthier food plan will look like, but you got to make this fit you still, right? I don't got to do that with a squat, hinge, push, pull, right? I can tell you have 20 minutes, a half hour, 45 minutes. And I'll make it fit your gym culture where your gym is, and that's about it. But if your mom likes to cook rice at dinner, we're probably going to put rice into your meal plan, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's why, I mean, the important thing to remember is when you're trying to, depending on what your goal is, right? When you look at all those different eating ideologies or eating plans or meal plans or diet plans or whatever people want to, whatever terminology they want to use, that when protein intake was equal, and when protein intake is equal, that they all work exactly the same. So you know what I mean? So it really doesn't matter. Like, if someone, that's what I was saying, like, if someone comes to you and they, like, I've worked with people that have kind of eating things all over that wide spectrum that you talked about. And I'm like, you don't want to eat this, that's fine. You don't have to eat this. If you want to eat this, yeah, we can eat this. And if we have a total calorie amount that we're trying to hit, because we've, taken our best guess, we've done the math on it and taken the best guess on where we think you might be in a calorie deficit if you're trying to lose weight or lose body fat. And we've equated and we've made sure that no matter what your eating style is, that your protein intake is adequate. Then it's all going to work the same at the end of the day, right? We've got those things covered. How you get the rest, like your division of carbs or fats, if you're a keto person and you have no carbs, or if you're someone that likes to have carbs because you feel better with carbs and stuff like that, as long as that total calorie number is the same, or what we determined how to have you in an effective deficit, and as long as that protein value is the same, how we make up your carbs and fats, we're going to choose good food sources. But whatever your split between the carbs and fats are, it's really irrelevant. You know what I mean? It can be completely individualized to the person, how they like to eat, how they feel when they eat, all those things, right? So you kind of break down all those diets and you just kind of look at them and just be like, yeah, whatever, like they can all work. You know what I mean? Like, as long as protein is equal in all of them, as long as we look at a protein, then any eating kind of plan or whatever that they want to do from there is going to be effective, right? As long as they're consistent with it and whatever they like, they like, and we can do, right?
I love that you addressed it just like that. So I got this terminology, which guided me on this principle so much, was from Ted Damon. And he's a huge protein advocate, but it's funny because I went in this rabbit hole of listening to all these different nutrition people when I was in the carnivore, and he was known as this protein guy. And I mean, he was just saying what every fucking strength coach says: eat your body weight in protein. But what he talked really well and he addressed well was he said it kind of in a simplest way for what you're talking about. And this is how I adopted my program is protein versus energy. Energy from carbs, energy from fats, your choice. And it's like there's benefits to either of them and there's drawbacks to either of them, right? So
Right.
I explain to people on all cases, like this is why these things are good, this is why these things are less good, and you choose. But then that term energy also encompasses all three macronutrients simultaneously. So this is kind of and then from there, this is kind of like what I call my purpose pyramid. The purpose of food is to give you protein because nothing else can do that job, and to give you energy. And you need some fats. You don't technically need any carbs, but you need appropriate energy, right? And that's in ratio of your protein, right? And so then, because if it's in ratio of protein, it's probably in ratio of your body and your size, then you need micronutrients, right? Because you need vitamins and minerals. I always say food for your immune system. And then the top of that pyramid is just straight up enjoyment. Is like, do you fucking enjoy what you do? And so I use this model and it works for a lot of things to look at the purpose of food. So chicken, rice, and broccoli, let's use a classic bodybuilding, right? Chicken is lean. So it's mainly protein. So you got your protein. Doesn't have energy. So we need to add energy. So we add white rice. White rice is a very blanched, no micronutrients in it. Neither does chicken. A little bit of iron, not much. So we put in broccoli. We got some extra vitamins and minerals. Do you enjoy it? Fuck no. Okay, let's restart because that's not your food, right? And it like the protein versus energy model made it very simplistic for me to help people without putting too many of my values into the diet plan, and to also help people so this is the interesting thing. I get people to track their protein and their calories, but you can choose what's in between. So in a sense, I don't count all the macros. I show them the percentage of what they're doing. And so in a weird way, it's, because I like your style too, because you showed me your style and it works really well because you never track calories. You just made sure you knew what your protein was and your carbs were. And so it was very simplistic. But what I like about the protein energy model, and it helped me so much when I was doing the carnivore diet, was I could, as long as I hit at least my body weight in protein, then the rest of it's fucking up to me. And it was just protein and fat, right? Because it was eating meat.
Right.
But what was great about that is that I could have a plate of whatever, right? And so, I kind of fast tracked too many clients on this. And now that I look back at it, but there's a lot of clients that just know how to make their meal plan, hit their calories and be satisfied without worrying about excessive redundancy, right? Because if you know your ideal proteins, then you make up the rest, and then there's a lot of variety that can happen. But this is a whole nother kind of discussion and debate, which I trust that you're in support of, is just the calorie argument. And this is where if you that's why I like the protein versus energy, because I'm literally saying, look at your total calories, look at the ratio. And if you're trying to be in a deficit, it should be probably closer to 40% of your protein, or 40% of your calories should be your protein if you're near your body weight or ideal body weight in protein. And then the rest can come from carbs or fats. And I was curious about this. This is something I did have a question, because I don't know the number, but I'd be curious to know, what do you think the minimum percentage of fats is for most people? What would you say?
So generally speaking, and it's where sometimes you might have to look between a male and a female, but generally speaking, the way that I work it or whatever is I never try to drop people's fat intake to less than 20% of their total caloric intake.
Mm-hmm.
That's only because obviously fat plays an essential and vital role in a bunch of the kind of daily jobs or duties or whatever that our body has, right? And it helps regulate body temperature. It helps with hormone production. It helps. There's a whole bunch of things. Specifically, too, I think when you're working with females, I think it's important that their fat never drops too low. So I can't remember if I'm being 100% honest, where I first got turned on to like the 20%, and like where I first kind of found that in research and stuff. And then I want to say like the first one maybe would have been Lane Norton, maybe Lane Norton. I'm guessing it obviously would have been one of the guys that I follow pretty regularly. And then from that point on, I remember just obviously like anything, you know, you kind of see something and then you follow it up with just doing more research on it. And whatever, I use the term research loosely nowadays because anytime anyone looks anything up on the internet, they classify that as research. When I don't know if that classifies as research, that just classifies as looking something up and reading it. But yeah. But anyway, I followed it up with reading a lot of other prominent strength coaches who I really respect a lot and follow, and kind of to get their idea. And it seemed to be pretty unanimous across the board. Like some of them had different things, but it was pretty unanimous that out of at least the guys that I followed and read, that 20% was kind of like a minimum, that if you want your body to be able to carry out all its regular functions in a healthy manner, then you should always make sure that you're getting a minimum 20% of your calories are coming from fats, like healthy fats. And so yeah, I kind of adopted that and into my own kind of work or whatever, working with people and stuff. And sometimes it's higher though, obviously, like sometimes it's higher. Sometimes people feel a lot better with higher fat, right? As you know, it really just depends. Like you said, the fats and carbs, I feel, can be almost interchangeable in that energy equation that you're talking about. Whereas I just tell people, like, let's just start, and then it's going to change over time, right? Like your workout program is going to change every 3 to 6 weeks, right? So there's no reason why we should think that your meal plan that we devised on day one should still be working on day 100 or 200 or 300 or 400, and it hasn't changed at all, right? You've been progressing in your workout plan, and we've been making progress. We've been, changing sets, reps, tempos, exercises, loading protocols, all those different things, and then you'll look at someone's eating plan and it's been 100% the same for the last 40 weeks or whatever, right? And you're like, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Like as our body change and we adapt to stuff and we make progress and stuff, and our workouts change, our demands now change on our body, and maybe our goals change, and maybe we have a different body composition now that, going to require macros, so I do feel that the meal plan should change, almost in conjunction, or at least get that information consistently back, just like you would with the workout plan, right? Some people feel better with higher carbs, higher fats, higher whatever. It might switch over time. It just,
I love that kind of discussion around like how you associate it with training, and it's important for people to look at that. And I'll also say there's some people who don't mind eating the same shit all the time. I was someone who ate the same shit most of the time, but I will say that if I look back at my old eating behavior, I would eat the same shit until I didn't. And then I ate like shit because I was craving some variety, right? So there could be some problem with that. But I definitely have had some clients that, one client in particular was like, she just, as soon as we got her where she was going, she just was fine with not changing it. And some people are very, like that. But that whole discussion around variety and stuff like that, that's why I love the protein versus energy model, because it shows people like, I want you to have consistency first, and then know how this consistency can be consistent and then still have variety within it. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is how can you make because it sounds super boring when you say meal plan. It sounds terrifying or just disgusting to reheat food and to not have a fresh meal all the time. And it's super ironic that these are the same people who, say they're too busy to worry about food. They're too busy. You're too busy to worry about food. But then at the same time, you want food fresh, and then you want food to taste good. And it's like, have you even, this is where I kind of, I don't want to say get bothered, but I just think is ironic is like, you got to try it because it's basically just a leftover and it's not that bad when you get into it. But the consistency there allows you to recognize, hey, eat this for like a few days. And if it doesn't taste that bad, eat something similar to it the next 3 days. That's really all we're saying, right? Chicken and something else with some other veggies. And even within each like of those like kind of areas, right? So you got your meat, you got your side, if you're doing some carb and you're doing some vegetable. All three of those can get varied in so many different combinations. But you actually, and this is something you said to me a long time ago, and more recently, just literally like very, very recently, I'm coming back to it because, so I'm going to tell you exactly one of the biggest lessons for me, it happened within the last month. And it was when I joined the new program for business training, and the guy who's my business coach, he had said, he's like, yeah, no, I used to do that too, try to send him videos, but it didn't, like, I just send them like 2 pages and they get all the results they need. I'm like, oh, so I'm not a genius thinking of this. It's kind of a classic, someone new in the industry thinking they're revamping it, but it's all been done before. And what I didn't appreciate about a meal plan was that that's where I did start. And so I kind of fast tracked people too much to the protein energy model, and you can eat whatever you want. And it's like, no, not actually. You can have a lot of variety within what is really good for you. And so more recently, I've been, okay, this is where we want to evolve. Do this for a while, just do this for a while. And then, hey, you can change this out and you can change this out and you can change this out. But they need to trust that evolution. And it's been a big learning curve for me just recently, because, I definitely, I think it was because how I had said from the carnivore approach when I was doing the protein energy model, it was the most freedom I ever had in my diet that was consistent. So I was so empowered by it that I just wanted everyone to know it, but I forgot where I came from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a learning curve like anything else, right? Like there's some value in, like, do I think it's great for people always to be worried and like stressing and counting every single calorie and weighing all their food and doing all that stuff? No, like it's tiresome, it's cumbersome, it's overwhelming, and it's just exhausting over long stretches of time, right? Do I think there's value sometimes in people doing some of that stuff for a period of time? Yeah, I do, because how else do you learn, right? Like you got to learn through experience and through doing stuff. And, sometimes like people don't know what 4 ounces of chicken looks like until they actually weigh out 4 ounces of chicken one day. You know what I mean? Like they really have no concept of like portion amounts and all these different things of what they're actually taking in and eating, right? When they are in a bit of a structured plan and when they are counting calories for a little bit of time, or they are weighing stuff and measuring stuff or whatever, now all of a sudden, you just kind of chalk it up. Like I chalk it up to a valuable learning experience. Are you going to live every day of your life like that? Absolutely not. No one is. Like that's, it's just not sustainable over the period of a lifetime, something that long. Is there value in doing something like that in the short term and actually learning what amounts and measurements and stuff look like, and actually so you get like a visual representation if someone says like, oh, have this much of your carb or your protein or your vegetable or your blah blah blah, and actually like measuring out for some time, so you actually get like a real visual so you now have a visual representation or like a reference point to go back to in your memory and be like, oh, yeah, I remember a couple months ago when I weighed this stuff and measured this stuff out. I remember kind of roughly how much it is. There's a lot of value in having that experience, right? So like you said, sometimes, yeah, there's value. There's something to be learned from everything. And sometimes, yeah, you can't accelerate people too quickly, or like you said, kind of forget where you would have come from, right? And just move people right into like hey, here's your number, eat whatever you want. Because that's when us as humans normally would like abuse stuff, right? Like I imagine, the whole like if it fits your macros, thing that became like extremely popular. And then I would see people on social media, and I'm like, I don't think this is what they had in mind. Someone just like sitting in bed with a spoon, eating a pail of ice cream at bed, being like, I ate no carbs. I ate 0 carbs all day, so I still have like, 180 carbs left on my macro. So I'm just gonna lay in bed and eat Haagen-Dazs out of the container. I'm like, I don't know if that's what they meant when they said like if it fits your macros. Like I feel like maybe if you accelerate people too fast through that process, they're more likely to abuse it. Whereas if, like you said, you have a bit of a foundation or some personal experience in like something a little more structured, then when you kind of earn those freedoms later, you have a much better kind of reference point or perception of what stuff should look like. And you're probably a lot more responsible with that flexibility than you would be without that experience,
Absolutely. And it was the if it fits your macros, so a good kind of proponent, I think, of it is kind of Lane Norton, but his whole thing, and he said it very eloquently, and he's like, I'm not saying that you have to have flexible dieting. I'm saying be flexible in your premise. He was he said it so well on a podcast where he's just like, be flexible with your approach. If you like keto, that's nothing wrong with that.
I'm going to eat some Christmas baking here and be very flexible with my.
I love that. Yeah, I'm very flexible. I got fucking cookies over here. I'll probably crush after. I'm a closet eater, man. I eat most food when no one's around. That's my whole thing. But
I'll eat on camera. I don't care.
Yeah, this is actually another really interesting thing. I want to actually ask you about this because we could have talked about that for a while, but it is relative to nutrition. And I've talked to you about this a little bit about like kind of metabolism. And it's probably been one of my biggest lessons in the last year, which it shouldn't have been because I got taught it, but I just recognized actually how it works. And it was Lane Norton who actually guided me on understanding what it is. And so, understanding the breakdown of your resting metabolic rate, your thermic effect of food, your exercise activity thermogenesis, and your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, this is where it's like, I know a lot of people get super it gets really interesting when people start using the word metabolism inappropriately. And I totally dove into this. And there was actually like a carnivore influencer that I dove into it, and the people would use broken metabolism or, and I do use the term reboot your metabolism, but I'm actually talking about realigning more than anything. Because your metabolism is your behaviors. Like that's all it is, right? And so your metabolic rate is your fucking metabolic rate. There's not that many controllable factors. But the one thing that I think is really interesting is why do some people not have a hard time and others do? And so I've spoken to you about this before, and I'll go on my theory after. But what do you think is the inherent difference between a metabolism of someone who's, say, an ectomorph or even a mesomorph, someone who just, oh wow, they just never put on weight, to someone who's like, fuck, I just always put on weight so easily? What do you think is the inherent difference within that metabolism, or what else could there be to that equation?
Well, I mean, obviously, like we all have a set of genetics that are individual to ourselves, right? I think sometimes genetics get used like a little too often in some of the discussions because people kind of like to just like lay back on them almost as excuses, where people will just be like, oh, like I can't do it. It's just in my genetics. Like I can't do it, And genetically, are we all the same? Absolutely not. We are not, I have worked out every day of my life and done every single performance enhancing drug under the sun and been as successful in bodybuilding as Arnold Schwarzenegger? No, I wouldn't have been. Our genetics are different. He was genetically, gifted to a point where he just looked that much better than everyone else, right? So genetics obviously are a real thing, and they do have an effect on our metabolism, on how we maybe process food, on how we maybe carry our body weight, our body fat, our body composition, or anything like that. But it's not a crutch. I think sometimes people use it as a crutch or an excuse as to why they can't get better, and that's why I know this sounds very cliched or whatever, but working out, whether you're, average Joe going to the gym, whether you're a high level athlete, whether you're an amateur athlete, whether you have specific goals, whether you're just going there for your own health, it is a very individualistic thing when you come to measuring progress, right? So I'm not saying that we all genetically can be Mr. Olympia or can win a gold medal in the 100-meter or play in the NHL or whatever. Some of us just genetically can't. But that doesn't mean that we cannot get better, And like I said, I know that sounds very cliched because everyone's like, oh yeah, get better, whatever, be the best version of yourself or whatever. But there's a lot of truth in that, So when it comes to, your question about the food and maybe how we process it or our metabolism and I mean, genetically it's we are predisposed to certain things, and our genetics are it's actually kind of a combination of our experiences plus our genetics, which I call that epigenetics, right? So obviously you could have two people with similar genetics that have different experiences or process experiences differently, and then their genes or their genetics express themselves in different ways, right? So, I mean, you could have a brother and a sister within the same family, or a brother and a brother, or a sister and a sister, siblings, let's say. And very similar genetics, right? Coming from the same parents. They might have had different experiences growing up. Those genetics might express themselves differently as they get older. You know what I mean? Maybe, I don't know, there's a million different scenarios that you kind of make up or whatever, but, we're kind of a combination of our genetics and our experiences. And that's kind of how we, so like I said, I don't like when people use it as a crutch or whatever, but it is a real thing. But if we are a combination of our experiences and our genetics, the nice thing is that as soon as we get to a certain age or whatever, we can kind of control our experiences. We can control how we perceive things and how we handle things, which means that we can maybe change how some of our genes are being expressed, and we could change how that gets passed on to our next generation when we have kids and stuff, right? So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's kind of a roundabout way or whatever, but I think there's probably something in there that hopefully answers it or gives it.
No, you did. You answered it from a very high level. So I have actually a theory, put it as a theory, because I've never seen any research or never looked up any research on it. And if I were to ever do any masters or anything like that, this is definitely what I realized I wanted to do. But it's something I've talked to you about before. And what you're actually describing is exactly this. And so I use the example of me and my brother because Kalen is more slow twitch and I'm more fast twitch. He's doing, literally, I did a bodybuilding competition and he went for a half marathon, like within a week. Like that's how we live our lives. Now, we grew up in the same household, right? Now, he's never, I don't think he's ever been below 12% body fat. And for me to be below 12% body fat has only happened when I'm actually trying to prep for something, whether it's a photo shoot or trying to look good on the beach. But so the thing that I think is, this is where I want to look at the genetic component, because I want to understand the genetic component that makes an individual more susceptible to a certain habit. And then the habit becomes amplified, right? So this is my theory, and the theory is something to do with the muscle physiology that associates with the way you work through food metabolically, and then that is fostered through your environment and your habits. So one of the really fascinating things I've learned in the last year is that glycemic index isn't true across the board. So there are some people who are super carb tolerant, is a kind of a term they use, where they use this Pop-Tart test. And if you have this continuous glucose monitor, and if you have a Pop-Tart, one individual, no, like for myself, I would imagine I would be a skyrocket blood sugar crash and back to the baseline. So those non-carb tolerant people would be like, okay, well, I have a crash and I have a craving most likely. And I say most likely, I always try to say none of this is absolute. I learned that from Lane Norton because I'll get called out on that through research. But then you have a carb tolerant person who it's like a blip. It's like nothing. It's like it didn't pull to them. And then you also have something about this muscle physiology that slow twitch muscle fiber types are more prone to run off of endurance and fats. Like they're more prone to just have steady state energy, like to just be in our normal life. Most of what we do is steady state energy, right? Most of it is just and you know, I don't know if you go into the development of saying that they develop ketones better, but I would certainly say if they didn't have food around them at any point, you know, a person like me would get very or would get hungry, and a carb tolerant person might not get hungry, or my brother. Now, again, epigenetics is a good term for this because it's how your habits manifest. And over the years, and you know, it was no fault to my parents trying to give me cereal and all the fundamental orange juice in the morning to give me vitamin C, not trying to skyrocket my blood sugar. Didn't know that these habits would manifest. The thing I look at is I never forget to eat. That's never been a problem in my life. And ectomorphs will say, oh yeah, I forgot to eat. I'm just like, fuck, like how? And so to me, it's this manifestation over habitual concerns of food and concerns over body weight. So concerns of food, concerns of body weight, manifesting your actual natural inclination of, I am more comfortable fed than I am not fed. And then you're probably going into yo-yo dieting. You're probably going into the worry of food all the time. Ectomorphs, and I'm saying these aren't absolute, these are general concepts. There's a spectrum in here, but ectomorphs, I'll use my brother as an example, could skip a meal, could, even if he dared to overeat, it's his overconsumption of calories. Like him overeating is like, let's say this is maintenance. He's overconsuming maybe 10 to 20% on a bad day. Me overconsuming calories and saying, fuck it, is double my calories. And that's not an exaggeration. Like that is easily what I do because I am so concerned about a deficit that I become so happy when I'm eating food. And as you just said, the epigenetics, think of the psychological level that has, that your routine mindset towards food is really a big part of the problem. And so this is where I look at, I believe that the problem with metabolism and people's, response to it is like, you do have some advantages and disadvantages in there based on your lean muscle tissue. I think it's likely that there's something there, because if there's people who, no matter what, can easily keep a physique without trying, there's something there. And there's some people who just are prone to put on weight. There's something there. But then once you actually narrow down that this is your metabolism, is what you're given, because that was a big thing for me. Was I was kind of following this guy, and he was saying, get metabolically healthy. You just got to eat at a maintenance basically, and you'll get metabolically healthy. I'm like, oh, cool. Like maybe I'll end up consuming more calories. That's what he made it sound like. He made it sound like if you eat like just without worrying about a deficit long enough, right, you get metabolically healthy, which is a terrible term. Yeah. To say that you can get that way, I guess, like, it's not a terrible term, but it's just like a terrible idea that you can't do that within like just simply having the right amount of food. But you know, it's like we make it sound like it's an engine that it's broken or fixed or something. It's your fucking behaviors. It's how you're living your life. The only, like, every single factor that we talked about, metabolic rate, thermal effect of food, exercise activity, and non-exercise, those are all only so controllable. So really, you can't change it much. And like, for me, it like dawned on me once I like heard Layne Norton talk about it. And I was like, oh, like, that's why I've always eaten the same calories for a deficit. And it makes sense, because a little bit more, because I gain a bit more size, but not that much. And my metabolic rate would change based on my activity because I'm not in the gym anymore. Yeah. And there is a challenge here. This is the challenge that I think that I do believe slow metabolic rates have, that the whole calorie equation becomes challenging, is the non-exercise activity thermogenesis is hard to account for. So lifestyle is hard to account for, and how much you actually burn in a day is hard to account for. And I had a client recently where we said, okay, if we look at the equation, look at your metabolic rate, and we say, if you do this, it should be a deficit, no change. And I'm like, okay, this is unfortunate, and I know you're disappointed, but we actually just found your maintenance. And I've always said, we hope that we know. There's always a guess. Yeah. And then always a guess. And so you just tested it out and it was incorrect. So then I said, okay, we know now, we can drop it down, come back to me in 2 weeks later. 2.5 pounds, almost 3 pounds lost in 2 weeks, because we knew the exact equation. And so this is where, like, to me, it's been one of my biggest eye openers, because I wanted someone to solve the metabolic problem for me. And then I realized it's me. You know, it's just like, stop fucking binging, be goddamn consistent, and know what you actually need for calories. And it's actually just way more boring of a story. But it was also interesting to hear Layne Norton talk about the metabolic adaptation, because people will talk about the metabolic adaptation, and that was the interesting thing. Like, what does that mean? So there could be you could lose lean body mass, which is going to lower your metabolic rate. But he talks about how it's innate. It's a non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And that's actually a big spectrum of things, right? So that's everything from where you walking around for your job to twitching. Yeah. Right? And you and I both know when you're in a bodybuilding, deficit, you're not twitching much.
No. Well, yeah. Well, the non-exercise makes up like 23 hours of your day. If you're assuming that you go to the gym for 1 hour, right, and work out for an hour, so it's the majority of your time, right? But like you said, everything is a guess, right? So when you're starting, and that's why I think the whole nutrition side of thing needs to be decently flexible, right? Because it is a guess. You're taking all the information that you have, you're making the best guess that you possibly can. And then from there, you're just adjusting accordingly, right? So like you said, you had a client there that you took your best guess and no progress was made in there. So you're like, okay, well, now we know, you know what I mean? Now we adjust, and then we check again. So I always like to tell people that, there's different ways of us measuring progress when they're trying to lose weight or lose body fat. And obviously one is going to be the weight on the scale. One is us redoing body fat measurements or whatever, but one is going to be a performance aspect too, right? Because it's finding that sweet spot. Like, if we want to for sure guarantee that we're in a deficit, that's easy to do. We could just go super, super low, right? But then you're going to feel, you're going to feel like 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag, right? You're going to feel awful, and your workouts are going to suffer, and they're going to be terrible. And so now you have another measurable thing to say that you're too low, right? So it's a guess, and that's going to constantly change based on your demands, right? Like your body's demands might change as you progress through your workout program and as you change your body composition, right? And those things will have to change.
Well, I think that's exactly the whole thing. It's a guess and check, right? It's always like this whole process of like we have theories and you try to practice it, and there's some people the equation works perfect. There's some people like you have to adjust it, and it's really interesting. And so, I'm curious. What do you think of my theory of? I think I called it behavioral metabolic rates. Like, what do you think of that whole concept? And I think we've talked about this before, but the development of how that's really one of the major things.
Yeah, well, 100%. Like, I think our behaviors kind of guide or determine or whatever the majority of our like progress anywhere in life. Outside of eating or outside of the gym, right? Your behaviors are really at the end of the day are what are going to determine. Like, you could take that example out of anything. You could take it out of how you're going to do in school, how you're going to do in the world of business, how you're going to do in the like in any endeavor that you choose to partake in your life. You're going to have a certain skill set, certain genetics, certain maybe connections, certain things that are already going to exist for you, right, in certain situations. But at the end of the day, your behaviors are still going to determine the outcome of those things, right? You could come from a really smart, business-minded family. You could have a grandfather or a grandmother or a father or a mother, that's passed down this business through generations, and it can get to you. So you could have all these connections, and you could have the family kind of business put on your lap or whatever. If you don't have the proper behaviors to work hard and see that vision of the business through or whatever, that business is still going to fail despite it being handed to you on a silver platter, right? So it'd be the same thing with training and nutrition. Like, if everyone's going to be born with certain advantages or disadvantages, or grow up with certain experiences that are going to lend themselves to maybe you having, some advantages or disadvantages in those areas. But at the end of the day, your behaviors are still going to determine it, right? If Arnold ate like crap and never trained in the gym, he wouldn't have been Mr. Olympia 7 times over and kind of considered the greatest bodybuilder if his behaviors didn't, his behaviors determined his success, right? His genetics didn't, right? Like nothing was guaranteed to him, right? So for sure, we're probably genetically predisposed to certain ways, but your behaviors are still going to determine your failures and successes at the end of the day. So I think you're right with that. Like you said, some of those things, like the thermic effect of food, you know what I mean? You could calculate it and study it all day. You're right. At the end of the day, the probably total effect that it's going to have on you is pretty minimal when compared to just how your daily behaviors are going to affect the outcome, right? If your daily behaviors suck, you could be like, oh no, I eat 200 grams of protein a day, and protein has the highest thermic effect of any food. So it's whatever it is. I don't know, what's the thermic effect of protein? 20%?
Yeah, it's 20% of the food, right? 20% of the calories. So it's almost one of the calories you don't even consume. But it's kind of confusing too. The one thing about that is kind of weird, right? Because the thermic effect of food or of protein is 20%. But what's funny about that, without trying to go too deep into this, you still use all 4 calories in your equation. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the funny thing about it. But no, and I fully agree with this, because it is your behaviors. And what I think, like, even for yourself is like an example to me, because you came from more ectomorph, you got a bunch of strength and size, and you essentially have been able to get big and strong, more fast twitch, obviously. But so this is even more of a question of, what do you think has reeled in your behavior? Because, to me, I've never felt comfortable. The last year was the only year, first year, I ever did an intentional bulk. And I even did it too much. I even went too high. And because I've never tried to have to gain weight. So this is my genetic, advantage that I can gain size easily. But my disadvantage is my capacity to control food. And so I guess it's hard to describe, but what do you think is the real difference within people? Or would you agree that it is within appetite itself manifesting over years? That's my main theory.
Yeah. So I mean, let me see here. So I mean, for myself to go from obviously being genetically, as always, pretty on the thin side, and I mean, for me, it was just, well, how bad did I want to get bigger, right? And like you said, did my behavior support that goal, right? I knew it was going to be hard. Trust me, no one's ever going to feel bad for you that you got to eat more food. It only works the other way around. When you tell people that you're full and you got to keep eating and you don't feel like eating anymore, but you got to eat more, no one's going to feel bad for you. And I don't expect anyone to feel bad for me that I had a hard time ever putting weight on, but I don't know. There's probably a separation in there of
Well, let's look at that right there. Just want to go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to say, what I like about your behaviors, though, is that that's something that you control.
Control. Yeah, you can't control
your behavior, right? So we don't always, let's say in the context of food, we don't always control our feelings.
Right.
We don't control our feelings. Our feelings are kind of involuntary. They happen, right?
Right.
But we 100% always control our behaviors.
Well, as much as we can with our behaviors. And so
our feelings can influence our behavior, right, by how we feel, but behavior is still always 100% a choice. And it is, I'm not saying by any means that it is an easy choice. There's all sorts of, circumstances or examples I'm sure people could come up with people exhibiting certain behaviors, that are kind of born into certain situations or circumstances or whatever, right? You're much more predisposed to maybe, acting a certain way or doing, kind of showcasing certain behavior based on your background and your upbringing and your whole bunch of things like that, right? But at the end of the day, still, in its most basic thing, it still is a choice. It's not an easy choice, and we might be so predisposed to not whatever. It might be the most difficult choice. It might even be almost unrealistic for people to think that they can make that choice based on their background or whatever. But it still is a choice, where our feelings and certain things like that are not, right? They're, like I said, we don't consciously choose to think of our feelings, right?
Yeah, I think I just want to interrupt this because you had something that's really important there that I didn't really take into context, but it was kind of what I was saying.
Yeah,
was the feeling towards food, is a feeling towards what you're doing. So I think one part of the metabolic whole equation that I think gets missed or is because when you do metabolic predictions of where someone's metabolic rate, which I had with this client, was that I think one of the major ones that you're predicting is probably meat or just how all of them end up, right? So unless we lock someone in a metabolic ward and we determine that's their metabolic rate, we will always guess on the average based on whatever the equation gives you. The equation can give you just body weight, age, gender. It can do body weight and lean body mass, gender and age. You can do lifestyle, any of those things. They're still going to be on a spectrum of people that they've done to figure out that equation. And so a part of me believes that because of that, because we know that that's all based on equations and stuff, is that people will be on the lower side of that equation, and we can't account for that until we try it. And then because they're on the lower side, and this is why I'm saying this comes back to that whole muscle fiber type. And I'm not saying it's absolute. I just think it's likely that muscle fiber type has an exposure to this. How often do fast twitch type people have a lot of fat, right? Like it's not always, but it's often, from my own personal experience. And we talked about even bodybuilding. Very often bodybuilders come from being leaner and wanting to get bigger. It's never been that has rarely ever been my insecurity. And a lot of people grow into wanting to get size. And so the thing that you had just said so well was how you feel. And that is actually what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how you feel about food. Do you feel full? Are you worried about being full? And I think there is a genetic component about whether or not, when you develop it as a younger age around food, are you worried about being full? And then from there, are you, oh shit, I'm starting to gain weight. I'm a teenager. I'm a little bit fatter. Oh, maybe I shouldn't eat as much. And then you actually maybe get into deficits. Maybe that's just a yo-yo cycle. Like I'm really talking about my own experience, but I'm also talking about probability, right? About how you could feel. And so I really like that term feel makes it more relative. And, the reason why, I think we're both coming to the same conclusion is like, own it. Just fucking own it. Like at the end of the day, I will have a bigger appetite than most fucking people. And I just have to own that until I don't feel it. And this is like, honestly, I do believe I can train it out. I believe I can train it out.
Yes. And so I think that's what I'm kind of talking about there, though, is I think we're saying the same, but I guess just how I'm wording it is, so your feelings towards food for that, you're not choosing those. You're not choosing your feelings towards food, but you are choosing your behaviors.
Okay, I'm gonna say one thing. Yes and no. I'm not choosing my feelings. No, you're right. I'm not choosing my feelings, but I made choices in the past that resulted into who I am today. Yes. So fully agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of what I was getting at with the part of the eating stuff there, is you're not necessarily choosing your feelings towards food, but at the end of the day, you will choose your behaviors. And I know your feelings can influence your behaviors, but at the end of the day too, like you just said, like, you feel a certain way, but you have a certain amount of experience now with it and stuff that despite how you feel, you've chosen a behavior. You still realize that you're in control of your behavior when it comes to the food, on how you act around the food and how you eat the food and how you prepare the food and what you choose to do. You know what I mean? So despite how you feel, because you've kind of recognized that the feeling might not be under my control, but the behavior definitely is. So your feelings of food maybe haven't changed from when you were a kid till now, but your behaviors have. You know what I mean? If that makes sense, that's how I kind of.
Well, it does, because in all honesty, the feelings have been changing, and that's what's actually been helping me. And some of the feelings are still there, and like just like full disclosure, I felt like I was getting on a good track when I started to really take a step back and look at metabolism and look at what my problem was, because like I did the whole prep and cut last year. Like bulk and cut. That was the first time I ever did it. And then I just had such a hard time sustaining it. And then I looked back and I'm like, oh, it's because I wasn't going to sustain 40 minutes of cardio in the morning and at night and do a workout. Like that's not sustainable. So there was a metabolic demand that I created that was unsustainable. And so then after I just recognized like, well, but why don't I just try to figure out the same thing consistently and get something out of that? And that was what really flipped my switch, was like, I need to own what I should be doing, even at a maintenance. And this has been my biggest statement for so many clients and myself for sure, is so many people who yo-yo diet don't try to practice even the in-between, because and I've told you this before, we go extreme to have an average in between. And if you can actually just practice maintenance routinely, even if you have resolutions and anything, no matter what, once a week, I do believe in a diet break refeed. And once a month, maybe a little bit longer, but once a month, I think people should practice a maintenance week when you're doing a fat loss goal, because you get where you're trying to go. You got to know what that actually feels like. Because let's say it takes someone 5 months. I'm just abstract number, but let's say you got a pretty solid weight loss goal. You're trying to lose quite a few pounds. And maybe it would, if you didn't do any maintenance days or weeks, it would take you 2 or 3 months.
Right.
But you get there and you say, fuck, I'm here. That's awesome. You go back to your old routine because you never developed any habits or behaviors that were going to stick. But if you actually recognize that I am practicing the new person that I am, and I got to recognize that who I'm going to be is right here. And I'm going to go back to this and I'm going to be here. Go back to this for a while. I'm going to be here. And then when you get there 5 months down the road, you actually have trained yourself to sustain that lifestyle. And this was, again, a Lane Norton influence. I think he's got great research. He talked about the Matador study, which was about two different groups where people did straight deficit or 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And the 2 weeks off, like the people who did diet breaks sustained their weight loss and had way less issues with the weight loss progress. And so to me, that's such an insight to what the problem is with people trying to lose weight and keep it off. Because it's all about sustainability. It's all about, like, to get where you want to go, you got to want to stay there, and what people don't know is that you're staying on a road of work. You're not staying at a fucking vacation resort. You're staying at a new person who embraces work and even for myself, I have to recognize what kind of capacity am I going to be willing to do to get the physique that I want consistently. And so that's what I'm trying to still discover to this day. And I mean, how many trainers do you know, personally or wherever, that actually sustain under 10% body fat year round?
One.
Craig. The most jack shred person I've ever met in person. I generally think that this guy was given to, I used to call him a Greek god. I think he was a gift from the Greek gods because he's goddamn built like one. And he's got I think military people would be terrified to discover his discipline.
Yeah. And his is always an interesting thing though, right? But he's, I know we've talked about this before. The way he sees it, like, he's kind of developed this whole type of way of looking at it where there's not a choice. So we feel that we make a choice. If you put down, a plate of nachos in front of me or chicken breast, I feel like I'm making the choice whether to eat the nachos or the chicken. You know what I mean? So I feel like there's always this distinct choice being made. And when you have to make that choice every day, day in, day out, every single meal, it can wear people down, right? So what he did, and this is not, I've never seen anyone else do this, so I'm not, suggesting that this is an easy thing or that people could immediately apply it. But he just eliminated the existence of the plate of nachos. So in his mind, he's never making a choice. There's never a choice. The other side doesn't exist. So there's not the two sides that he's choosing from. The other side doesn't exist at all. So there's no choice being made. So in his mind, he's eliminated the difficult kind of choice that wears you down meal after meal, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. The choice doesn't exist. There's only one option, which takes an extremely high amount of mental fortitude. I'm not even really quite sure how you get there, other than that's how he got there. And there's never a choice being made. So that's again though, that's a behavior change, right? Like he's able to change his behavior towards food and nutrition and stuff. So but it's interesting because when you talk to him, he doesn't think he's sacrificing anything. We think we're sacrificing something by eating healthy. If you took 100 people out of our population and you had them eat healthy for a month, I guarantee 100 out of 100 of those people at the end of the month would tell you that they would have sacrificed something.
Yeah.
They would have made some sort of sacrifice to eat healthy for the month. In his mind, he's made no sacrifice. You know what I mean? There's only the one. It's almost hard to wrap your head around that idea initially, but once you kind of understand where he's coming from, you kind of appreciate this very simplistic kind of reality that he's created for himself, where there's no choices, you know?
Well, no, I love that description. You've told me that before, and it's so valuable to appreciate, because what you're talking about is you're talking about behavior change. You're talking about true behavior change. And I don't think people appreciate that's what they're going for, especially when they come from like a situation where they have a lot of weight to lose. They have to change a lot. And then they have to a part of you has to leave. There's habits that cannot exist. And part of me, this has been a huge thing for me is I more and more each year I'm getting better, but as simple as it sounds, it's me and weed and binging, or just binging in general. And I've had that habit for a very long time. And now I'm starting to realize this person has to die. You have to be okay with that. But when you look at the choice, this is something that I think is really interesting when you look at the different diets. And because I resonate with this from being on keto and carnivore, from operating in extremes, was, well, if it wasn't a choice, what else could you eat? Wow, there's nothing else. Right. It's I ate all my protein and fat and carbs for the day. I have no other choice. And so because that's where people go when they go keto, it's actually very guiding. It's such a prominent tool for them. And that's why I understand why people can live that. And I also understand why people don't live it, because if you don't intend on using that as a tool for yourself, then it's a terrible thing to do, because you're going to gain your weight back. Carnivore was similar, where it was hey, all I can eat is steak tonight. Well, that's all I'm going to eat, because I've had enough. And as delicious as a good T-bone or a good ribeye is, you're going to hit your limitation. And I generally, and this is my biased opinion, this is my anecdote, is that I will limit my consumption of, red meat, protein and fat way faster than I would from carbohydrates. And I think this is why the carnivore and keto community exists, is because when the other options are on the table, it makes them uncomfortable, or they will go into binging and all the other things. And so that's why when you hear Craig say this thing, it's the decision's already made. It gives him empowerment to recognize this is just my identity. And so I really value that little insight that you had on him, because I've been thinking about it constantly. And I actually always tell my clients this, and I've told you this before, is if you are deliberating for your decision and you're trying to justify it, it's a poor choice, because good choices don't take justification. When you're making the right choice, it's already done. When you're making a poor choice, it takes you about 5, 10. Yeah, no, I'm going to do it anyways. and another thing that you had mentioned is your subconscious mind has already made this decision. You're just waiting for your mind to actually get the paperwork in order to fucking send that file forward. Yeah, we're doing this. We're fucking binging tonight, Rylan. Let's go.
We're doing it. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, no, I think it's an interesting topic, because the big thing with just people and fitness and food is a lot of it has to do with identity, and I don't think that gets discussed enough or is recognized enough. Is there, and I I had a podcast, and I'm going to be working a little bit with a gal she doesn't tailor herself as an emotional eating coach, but that's basically what she does. And she basically just gets people to recognize their own emotions. It has way less to do with the food and more to do with how they're using food to deal with their emotions. And it helped me a lot. It helped me so much just from one little presentation to give my clients and one little discussion on my podcast. And so it's been a real eye opener for me, because it's the way we behave in general around all these things that we want to do. We have to recognize that you are who you are right now, and if you're going to break away from that, that's so going to be way more difficult than you think. And Jason Brooks is a sports psychologist. He talks about this voice of resistance from the book of Stephen Pressfield, and you're going to hit this resistance point until it just becomes you. Like it was a very eye-opening thing that when you feel a voice telling you to do the alternative, it's actually the sign to lean into that voice and to do opposite of it. And so, have you ever heard of that book, Art of War by Stephen Pressfield?
I've heard of it. Yeah, I've never read it though.
Oh, please do, because that would be right up your alley.
It seems similar to the obstacle is the way. That type, like line of thinking.
Very, very similar. Very similar. The reason why I think, because I've read them both, I think the obstacle is the way he gives you more mental strategies. Stephen Pressfield gives you this, I don't know how to describe it, almost like a poetic appreciation of what you're capable of. And so, although they're both very on the same line, but Stephen Pressfield orchestrates this as you don't know what you owe yourself in a way. Right. And I think obstacles the way is more of kind of like, okay, like you should probably do this, and gives you good stories. They are very similar. I won't argue that, but they very much approach it differently with the discussion. I think you'll appreciate it. And that's why, like, when I look at the behavior change in general, people don't know the resistance they're about to come up against. Like, you don't know how hard this is going to be. No matter how good your intentions, no matter how good your motivation is at the time, it's going to be fucking 10 times harder, because true habit takes way longer to set in than you think, right? How many people are going to go through like a resolution right now and fail? Like, a lot of people. Something I thought about was Lane Norton's thing. 9 out of 10 people who try to lose weight will lose weight, but then will gain it back. And I'm wondering, like, I wonder if the New Year's resolutions are similar. I wonder if, like, 9 out of 10 people who try to do New Year's resolution try to change and they don't. And so what's the 1 out of 10 doing different? What are they doing different? That's my question. And my theory is, well, a few things, but a couple things is, 1, simple, and 2, consistent, right? Because simple yields consistency, right? And so, I don't know. Like, I think that's kind of the interesting thing that I look at.
I mean, I would say you're probably not wrong about the resolutions, the percentage, but obviously, the simpler something is, the higher probability you have of being consistent with it, right? And then I think that it's kind of funny, but like, no one ever really wants to do something until they really, or no one ever does something, sorry, I should say, or accomplishes something until they really want to do it, and I know that seems obvious sometimes, but a lot of people partake in certain things, but aren't like fully in it, or they're not convinced they can do it, or they don't. There's a whole number of reasons that kind of like prevent them from maybe succeeding or accomplishing it. But eventually they kind of hit that point where if it's important enough to them, they, who knows what it is, but there'll be some sort of breaking point in it or whatever, where all of a sudden now they've decided that they really want to do it. Right. And then that's when it gets done. Right. Like it's like that for, working out and nutrition goals and people losing weight. And, you'll see people struggling to lose weight all the time. Then all of a sudden something will happen, like they'll have a heart attack or something. And then all of a sudden, they lose 100 pounds or whatever, right? Because now there was something in there that now they decided they really want to do it. Before they thought they wanted to do it and they talked about doing it and they did or whatever, you know what I mean? But they weren't quite there yet. They hadn't fully committed to like wanting to do it, right? I think it's kind of in human nature though, sometimes, like, unfortunately, we'll just like, we'll wait so long on stuff or procrastinate so long, or we'll do, kind of do stuff half-heartedly. So, you know what I mean? And then until something kind of pushes us or motivates us or forces us or flips a switch in us or something like that to kind of get going, right? And you just kind of think about like what we could potentially be accomplishing if we like did everything that we knew we were supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? Like for that person that waits until they have a heart attack, they knew 10 years before that they should have been trying to exercise and eat better and lose weight. You know what I mean? So imagine if they would have done it for like the 10 years ahead, like where would they be at now, But I don't know. It's kind of a complex thing, I guess, of like human nature and kind of how we react to stuff or respond to certain things, right? Like if any of us are honest with ourselves, we all probably got a list of things in our lives right now that we know that we should be doing that we just aren't doing. And that's even outside of working out or training or eating or nutrition or anything like that, right? And we'll eventually get around to doing it when it becomes important enough to us. And then you could sit back and think of like, man, I knew I should have been doing that for the last 5 years, like I knew I should have been doing that, like for the, and not that you don't want to like waste any time, worrying about what's done and gone by already in the past. But it is a funny thing that most of the stuff that we know we should be doing, we've known for a long time before we actually get the motivation to follow through on it, right?
I think that's well said. I think that's extremely well said. That I didn't even talk about the why enough. I think that's super well done. Thanks so much for joining. That was a wonderful conversation with AJ, and that's just part one. Please join into the next one as we keep it going. We dive more into really questioning different ideas and questioning our own ideas. And we even talk about, what do we think about when it comes to the new years? I really like to explore that with AJ, what he's looking forward to in the future and what he's working towards. And it's some really awesome discussion. So I think you're going to enjoy that one as well. If you did like this, please hit subscribe, send it to a friend, send it to someone who's really also passionate about training and nutrition so that they can hear what strength and conditioning coaches who have been doing this for a long time get to explore their thoughts and ideas on this stuff. And very important that you remember this too. It's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within the pursuit. I'll catch you next week.